Hi,
You,
welcome everyone. I'm Elise Washington, a project manager supporting the Missouri Healthy Schools Initiative. Missouri Healthy Schools provides students with lifelong advantages built on early positive health behaviors to improve conditions for academic achievement. Check out our website, mohealthyschools.com, for more info, and I'll be sure to drop that in the chat as well. Today, we're really excited to have with us Nathan Hilliard. He's the Training and Program Replication Manager from Wyman Center. He'll be providing a look at how to bring social and emotional learning skills to the classroom setting and teeing us up for a longer series of social and emotional trainings that'll be hosted this fall. So I'll hand off to Nate to get us started, and welcome.
all right, welcome everyone. We are so glad that you are able to join us, whether you're joining us right here now live on June 16th, or whether you are accessing this recording at a later date. As Elise said, we are going to talk all about social and emotional learning today, as well as really what is it that we can do as adults, as teachers, as educators, as support staff, to ensure that we are providing our young people with the opportunity to develop these critical skills and abilities. We will be using some online activity tools as well as some breakout time. So we will do our best to summarize these for those of you who are watching this as a recording later on. But we're very excited to spend some time with all of you this morning. And actually, one of the first things that I would like to do as we get started is to utilize one of those online tech tools. So as we think about spending some time together this morning, we want this to be an engaging training. We want this to be an informative training. And we want you to feel comfortable being part of this space. So we want to take a moment and ask everyone participating for about the next 90 minutes in this webinar, what is going to best help you to learn? What is going to best help you to engage? What is best going to help you to feel safe? This might be something that we can provide as the training staff. This might be something that you might need from your colleagues and collaborators here in this space. Or this could be something that you know that you are in your own self-awareness and control over and can provide. So in order to respond to that, what we're going to do is use an online feature called Padlet. I'm going to share a link with you all in the chat right now. You can respond to each of these three questions anonymously. So you can tell us what is going to be helpful for you to learn, feel safe, and engage when we think about our next 90 minutes here. Also, if you're unable to use Padlet, you're also welcome to unmute and share out loud if you prefer. Or to utilize the chat feature. All right, so I've got some stuff already coming in. We're going to give folks a couple of minutes more to respond, but so far I see being honest, right? So knowing that we are all coming from a starting space, some of us might know more about social emotional learning than others. That's fine. Let's work with one another honestly and openly so that we can gauge where that starting place is and we can build with one another from here. Right alongside that, being transparent, I see in the chat, is going to be completely important to our work here. Some things we might be able to answer immediately. Some things we might have to say, I don't know. Let's make a plan to be able to follow up. I see that it will be helpful today to have a breakout room. So we will be using that. We want some small group discussion. We want to hear how some of this is applicable to you. And sometimes the best way to do that is in groups. I also see prompts for discussion. So yes, I will have some real specific questions that I want you all to consider as we work through some of the concepts today. And lots of great stuff here also on feeling safe. So being able to be at home, right? Being comfortable, being able to engage is wonderful. Making sure this is a judgment-free space. I think that's really important as we think about our ability to learn, especially in SEL development. It's really important to be able to fail safely, right? To be able to mess up, to be able to make mistakes, and to be able to then learn from those and be able to take new lessons out of that experience. So we want to make sure that we are calling people in rather than calling people out, and ensuring that we all have that space and time to work with one another. I love this idea of what's said here stays here, but what is learned here leaves here, right? So making sure that we are putting these applications out for what we have come up with in our time together, without trying to put anybody else on the spot for something that they may have said. So what are those overall lessons that we want to take away? I also see somebody here's got Nate's vast knowledge. Well, then we are in big trouble, because Nate is still a learner here, just like the rest of you. I'm happy to share my experiences and skills, but it's going to take your experiences, your skills, your knowledge to really make this that robust training as well, right? We don't want to just hear my voice. We want to hear from all of you, whether it is verbally or using the chat or in those breakout spaces. So thank you all so much for taking a moment to add to that. I think that those are some really great things that we can all consider. We should all be able to use in our time together here. If anybody does have any concerns about any of these, please feel free to message us in the chat or reach out about what these guidelines may be or how we can use them. So let's take a moment, and there's a couple of things that I think that we need to cover before we can even get into this concept of social and emotional learning. The first one is positive youth development. So I've got a brief definition on the PowerPoint here. This comes from the Interagency Working Group on Youth Programs. I'm going to give you all a moment to read this, and I'd like you to tell me what words or phrases stand out to you. All right, Chelsea here says positive relationships, right? Also the comment on strengths, making sure that we are relationship centered.
Support.
Support. Thank you, Jerome. Why is that something that connects with you this morning?
Well, oddly enough, about 10 minutes before this started, we got word that one of our students was hit by a car
Oh my goodness.
from cross country practice, and just one of those freak accidents. And so not only, automatically thinking, here I am going to a trauma informed meeting in 10 minutes, and we've got like brand new trauma in our tiny little school, K-12, 100 students. But on top of it, I was talking to my daughter and letting her know, and we counted the number of just big, huge trauma accidents we've had in the last 5 years, and 3 of them in a town population of 300. Like I said, a school the high school has 30 students in it. And every single time we supported them. And now it's time for us to start thinking about the trauma we don't see and try to support those folks too. So that's where it comes from. Long answer to a good question.
No, very much appreciative. We're so sorry that that has happened in your community this morning. We hope that that young person may be all right. But your point is really valid here in terms of that necessary level of support, right? So how do we help young people for those things that we do see, we are aware of, but also that we may not know is happening because they're not openly discussing it or they're not openly showing signs of it. We still want to make sure that we are there as a resource to be able to be with those young people. And we know, yep, go ahead.
I guess I should add, he is breathing on his own, and he was life flighted to Children's Mercy. So he is probably going to make it, but we'll see. And yes, we are, as the chat said, a family.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. And we know that this model, this ability to work with young people in a way that, as many of you have pointed out here in a chat, that is based in relationships, that is focused on strengths, that is engaged in providing young people support. These are so important for a young person's development and a young person's well-being, because it's helping them to build on their development as an asset, right? So we're not looking at things that they lack. We're not looking at deficits. We're engaging them in that positive manner, in that strength-based approach, so that we can assist them making through grade school, high school, that successful transition into adulthood, so that they can determine what does life look like for them in a way that keeps them happy, that they have strong, healthy relationships, that they can make positive decisions for themselves and to support those others around them. So this is really that lifelong process. We know that coming at this strength-based approach is incredibly important because of the way that our brains are developing when we are young. Thinking specifically about those school age years is really important to know how we're best able to learn, develop habits, practices, skills that really set our standards for the way that we will engage others and conduct ourselves throughout life. So real brief, if you've ever been to a Wyman training, you know we can't do anything before we talk about brain development, because it is important to everything that we do. We know that the brain develops from the back to the front, right? So we are developing kind of like a mushroom that I like to think of, back to the front, bottom to the top, and inside out. We know that one of the early parts of our brain to develop is that amygdala, right? That amygdala is our emotional response center. It reacts to external stimuli, and it is what is in our brains to really help protect us, especially as we think about young people who have experienced trauma. We may have young people who have an overly active amygdala because of that trauma response. When they are constantly feeling threatened and unsafe, this amygdala really wants to stay in control and doesn't allow the rest of the brain to develop as regularly as it otherwise may. We also know that after the amygdala strongly develops, we start to develop the nucleus accumbens, which is really that risk reward center. And if you've known any young people who might say, take a risk without thinking about the consequences, this is a natural part of their brain development, because this part of the brain really focuses on pleasure. It is going to overestimate risk. It is going to overestimate reward. It is going to underestimate risk. So it wants to make sure that, yes, I'm going to take that risk, even if I'm not really considering what that long-term impact might be. And then when we think about that long-term, we think about our prefrontal cortex, where our logic and our reason lives, where we can work through the perspective of others, where we can set and achieve long-term goals through delayed gratification. We also know that this part of the brain, as we finish developing, does anybody have an idea of how long it takes for our brains to develop?
Age 25.
Yeah, thank you. It is absolutely right in that range, right? So we know that this process takes us well into our mid-20s, right? There's even research that's coming out now that suggests it might be closer to 30. So in this time that we are working with young people in schools, we know that their brains are primed for this development, that they are really working hard, and that they are like a sponge for information, which can be really challenging, but it is also an incredible opportunity for us to provide some of those healthy supports. Right? So we know that DNA really is what triggers the development, but use informs how that brain structure takes place. So we want to think about, how are we helping young people to practice skills, to learn new concepts? Which of those are going to be used and strengthened, and which of those might not our young people have a lot of opportunity and access to, that might be pruned away because the brain sees them as less important. The more practice our brains have with an experience or with a concept, the stronger it becomes locked in, right? So as we provide services, education, opportunities, programs to our young people, based on what we can provide them, we are helping those brains to be custom built, custom modeled. So we want to be really intentional and conscious about what it is that we are doing in our time with young people to ensure that we are helping them to develop those strong skills. So that takes us to this idea of social and emotional learning, right? You may have heard of social and emotional learning before as non-cognitive skills or as soft skills. And both of those terms are really out of date, because I challenge anybody to work these social emotional learning skills without heavy lifting by that brain, right? We know it takes time, effort, and practice. So it is a huge use of our cognitive abilities, right? And there is nothing soft about these. These can be challenging for us as adults to master. This is difficult. This is hard. So social emotional learning skills is a much better way to think about how we engage ourselves and how we engage others for our well-being. So I'm going to give you another definition, and I'd like to address this the same way we did positive youth development. When we think of social emotional learning, I'm going to give you a moment to read it, and let's see what words or phrases stand out to you. All right, we see process. Yeah, this isn't a one-time event. Social emotional learning is not something that we do once and then we get it. Think about all of the practice that it takes to be able to learn to manage your emotions. Think about all the effort that it takes to be able to come up with a goal setting and then being able to see it through. We didn't just instantly get that the first time we tried it. It takes a lot of practice, right? We see some other great stuff here in the chat that focus on empathy, right? That connection to others, being able to understand and manage so that we are aware of, right? We are familiar with, and then we have that level of empowerment and manage. We can be able to control. And then that idea of relationships. Social emotional learning is not completed in a silo. It is reliant on relationships. We learn from and with others, and relationship management is a huge part of social emotional learning because it's going to require skills like communication, like empathy, right? As we determine who we want to have relationships with, whether those are friends, colleagues, romantic partners, and what we want out of those relationships, being able to set healthy boundaries and negotiate other needs and wants as well. Yeah, right. We know that we are all coming in with our unique and individual stories that and experiences that we'll have to, one, be able to work through and process, and then two, use to support one another as well. So why is social and emotional learning so important? When you think of this quote, is this something that we should spend a lot of time and effort on? Is this something that seems not such a big deal? What's the importance behind taking the time to help young people to develop these SEL skills? All right, I see some great stuff in the chat, right? It's going to affect all aspects of our life. When we take social emotional learning, we take it into our work. We take it into our personal relationships. We take it into the way that we choose a good life path, right? Awesome. We also know that SEL has real concrete impacts on young people's well-being and success in the classroom. So we know that young people who have stronger social emotional skills have improved attitudes about themselves and about others at school. We know that young people who have strong emotional skills have more positive classroom behavior, right? Because they have that skill to recognize when their emotions are increasing, and they have the skills to be able to self-manage that emotion, to be able to say, here are ways that I can relax, calm down, concentrate. Or if they don't, they also have the communication skills necessary and the supports necessary to be able to ask for help, right? To be able to say, I am getting frustrated. What here can I do, right? On the test side, we know that young people with strong SEL skills have an 11 percentile gain on standardized tests versus their peers, right? So again, being able to manage, to be able to stay focused in on classroom learning is going to result in higher test scores. On the opposite side, we know that young people with strong social and emotional skills have fewer conduct problems, right? They are suffering from less emotional stress and they exhibit lower drug use than their peers. Because when we have these social emotional skills, we are able to navigate to the resources and the opportunities that are around us to be able to get those supports, to be able to find outlets elsewhere, right? And I see some really great stuff here in the chat also, that these young people are able to make rational decisions, right? That's going to increase their awareness. And it's also going to build on how we engage with one another in that emotional intelligence space, right? How do we relate to others is really important. Hopefully you'll recall from the slide that you saw just a minute ago that SEL is not just for young people. This is a process that we all go through as adults, right? That we are always constantly working our social and emotional learning skills. Sometimes we are improving and increasing them. Sometimes we might fall back on things that are less helpful, less beneficial to our well-being. So we know that adults need SEL practice and mastery as well. And we know that educators who possess strong SEL skills are more likely to stay in the classroom. They're not going to feel burned out because, again, they're also going to be able to provide themselves the self-management and the self-care that they need to deal with a stressful school year. And I know that we have all had a stressful school year, right? You all have putting in an incredible amount of social and emotional development and practice over the last year as you work to support your young people, support yourselves, and support your own loved ones in the current conditions that we've experienced in the last year, right? We know that these long-term goals of SEL, as we think about supporting young people to develop them, they're going to help with our overall education attainment. They're going to help young people's employment prospects, right? They're also going to really support the healthy development of young people's mental health, making sure that we have those skills in place that are there when we need them, as we need them. Sometimes we use them all the time without being conscious of them, but the more conscious that we are, the more that we can call them out in practice and in use, the more our brain hardlines them as that go-to skill, as that necessary practice that we have. So what are these SEL skills, right? What are these SEL skills that we're talking about? And what do we do about that in the classroom? So here's really where we're going to take that leap. I see that great comment in the question, John. So what are the skills here? So the first thing that I want to show you about the SEL skills, and some of you may be familiar with this. Has anybody seen this wheel from Castle? You can use the chat or you can tell us out loud here. So I see a couple of yeses in the chat. I see a couple of heads shaking this way, which is absolutely great, right? Again, we are all coming from that learning position. So this comes from CASEL. This is the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. They are a nonprofit policy group based in Chicago. And when they think about social and emotional learning, they are looking at a couple of different categories. So first is the idea of self-awareness. What comes to mind when you think about self-awareness? Yeah, self-esteem, right? Knowing that we have values and skills and strengths to share with others, right? Knowing who we are in connection also to those around us, right? Knowing that we have that efficacy to take opportunities and make changes. We also talk about self-management, right? So this is really that self-regulation. How do you manage your emotions? What do you do when you get stressed out? How do you bring your emotions back into the point where you were in control of them rather than allowing that amygdala, right, that back of the brain, just to respond? Oftentimes when we see hyperarousal or dissociation among young people, whether it is a stressful situation or even into a traumatic situation for young people, right? As that amygdala takes charge, as it responds to that external stimuli, our ability to self-manage, to self-soothe is going to be really an important skill to have so that we can process through that experience rather than being completely overwhelmed by it. CASEL also looks at social emotional learning when it comes to the way that we engage with others. So we've got social awareness, right? So that ability, again, to know kind of really what are some of society's values and norms? What are ways that we could or should or might act in public? How do we engage with those around us, right? How do we see ourselves in relation to, in connection to individuals, to groups, or into our entire societies, right? And then we've got relationship skills. So when you think about relationship skills, what might be in there as you think about helping young people to learn to create and to manage healthy relationships? Right, see, empathy, absolutely. Being able to understand the experiences of others. Compromise is really going to be an important one, right? Being able to negotiate, know what your non-negotiables are, and then know what is available, right? Being able to demonstrate respect is a huge one. So thank you all for sharing these in the chat. These are phenomenal. Also, those important active listening skills. Yes, and absolutely, John Lawrence, to your point here, not just having these skills, but knowing how to apply these skills, right? Knowing when to put these skills into practice are going to be really important for us to be able to learn and develop as we are young, because we are going to need them for the entirety of our lives. The last category here that CASEL gives us is responsible decision making. And this one is really one that we do on ourselves as well as in relationship with others, as we think about what are those decisions that I'm making that are healthy, that are going to support my goals, that are going to be productive to whatever I have determined that I want my life path to be, right? And also, who and how do I engage others in that decision-making process, right? How do we as a group decide what to do based on what our shared interests and our shared goals are? So CASEL gives us these large 5 categories of being able to develop social emotional skill sets. And then you see our rings on the outside. So we know this is important in the classroom. There's going to be modeled in our schools. It's important to come from families and caregivers, and it's going to be really strengthened by our communities as well. So let me pause here and see if you all have any questions or comments about this description or infographic of social and emotional learning.
Where did CASEL get all of his research from?
So they have a number of research projects that they have done on their own, as well as a deep history of looking at social learnings and educational outcomes as well. I'm happy to link you to their site so that you can see all of the different research reports that they have available that they've drawn this from.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. We'll make sure that we add that as part of the toolkit, so it'll get put onto our slide deck as well. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts on this infographic?
So how is this different from, let's say, PBIS?
Yeah, so a great question, right? So a lot of this is very similar in nature, but might have different terminology or might have different methods of instruction. So here, when we look at these 5 big areas of social and emotional learning, these are just our big 5 target areas that we know young people need to develop skills in, but it doesn't necessarily come with a specific instruction method the way that something like PBIS may, right? So PBIS is going to be supporting many of these social emotional learning skill development areas, but that is really where we get into providing some additional methodology and strategy. And actually, so I'm going to use that as a segue to my next slide here. So when we as an organization, Wyman, think about social emotional learning, we look at 6 big domains. I really like the Castle's wheel. I really like their broad scope, but sometimes we need to be able to focus a little bit more directly and think a little bit more critically about what do those specifically mean? What are those skill areas that we want our young people to develop so that they are able to be sufficiently skillful and starting to master in those CASEL areas. And for us, those areas are emotion management, empathy, teamwork, responsibility, initiative, and problem solving. Right. So if we had to identify 6 major skills of social emotional learning, this is what we've got for our young people. It's also what we've got for adults, right? So this is, think about all the time that you all put into teamwork, working with your colleagues, getting that school year to a success. You know, we know that it's going to take a lot of responsibility as we all have specific roles to play in our schools and in our communities. We know that problem solving is a daily aspect of your life, right? You are always working at problem solving for your students' experiences. So this is for adults as well as for young people. But we know that when young people are able to really practice and learn these 6 skill sets, that they are better equipped in those social emotional learning categories, that they are then going to be more likely to use these not just outside of the classroom, but in every experience that they have in their life, right? It becomes their brain's go-to response when that prefrontal cortex is working, right? When those neural pathways are really developed. So these 6 areas are what we're going to talk just briefly on right now. And then additionally, in our fall trainings, we have a much deeper focus on these 6 areas, really thinking critically about the key youth experiences that are going to support this, as well as some assessment and measurement tools that we can use to review and analyze our efforts as practitioners to be able to support this healthy development of young people. So also know that we will get much deeper into this in those follow-up trainings in the fall, which we hope that you all will be able to join us for. But when we think about these 6 areas, think about the young people that you work with. Are there any of these skill areas that your young people could use some extra support in? Or are there any that your young people really excel at? Which of these seem to be easier? Which of these seem to be more difficult for the youth that you support?
I would agree with Chelsea. I think teamwork is a tough one.
Yeah. Can either Chelsea or John, can you say more about that looks like when it's challenging?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say that I'm in a school district, and I would say the emotional management component, and we've really try to hone in on that, on finding ways that when something happens in the classroom, or perhaps they've come from home and they've had a stressful morning, we're trying to implement ways for and giving the students tools to calm themselves before they take it to that next level.
Yeah.
So recognizing how they feel, and then we call it calm, and just telling them to have a couple of moments to breathe, perhaps maybe go out into the hallway and remove themselves from the situation. That's a complete work in progress, obviously, but just instead of just lashing out at somebody in class or their teacher or saying something disrespectful, just having them take a moment and realize how they're feeling with it, dealing with it, and then before they react. But that's the goal, I guess.
That's the goal. And it sounds like you all are doing some great practice, right? So that tangible skill of being able to remove yourself from the situation, or to practice breathing or being quiet, right? And then being able to identify those emotions so you can better manage them. I am sure that it is challenging and frustrating, but I'm so glad to hear that you all are putting that into practice. Something that I always think about is, how many of you have heard somebody say to a young person, calm down? Yeah, we know that it is really common, but if I'm a young person and I haven't been given the skills and the opportunities to practice how to calm down, all that's going to do is be disruptive to my experience, right? Because at that point, you are telling me to do something that I don't know how to do, or that I can't get control of. And I'm going to further be escalated on that behavioral dysregulation. So the idea that you are proactively helping young people to understand their emotions, to be able to, as we say sometimes, to name it and claim it, right? We got to know better, then we can do better. Giving them time to really understand their emotions, and then think about ways that they can start to regulate, or that they can start to ask for help, is a huge goal as well, often for many of the young people that we support, right? To be able to say that I am frustrated and I don't know what I can do, but I know that you are a safe person and I know that you are able to help me, right? So then being able to recognize us as those caring adults in their life that can provide some of those resources and opportunities is really important, right? I also see some really great things here in the chat about folks still recognizing that they are learning through some of this, right? Still being able to figure out sometimes what that emotion management means for us as adults. And I think that this point on emotional management also really goes to that idea of teamwork that got mentioned earlier. Because if I can't manage my own emotions, when I'm engaged then with others who might be suffering in the same place, right, also not able to manage their emotions, that's going to be frustrating for everybody, right? Because we're going to be so focused on trying to regulate one another in a way that is ineffective that we're not going to be able to focus on the goal of the lesson or the activity. So learning to manage our emotions is going to be a really important part of being able to provide teamwork for one another, really be able to recognize the skills that others are bringing in and the value that they can add to whatever the project is we are working on, whether that is putting together something for the science fair, working through a difficult math situation, or something, trying out for the school play, going out for a sports team, being part of an orchestra quartet. Like, all of those are going to require teamwork. But oftentimes when we are using those opportunities, we are not calling it out as teamwork, right? We're just saying, work on this math problem. We are just saying, complete this experiment. We're not saying, hey, while you were doing this, you were also engaging in teamwork with one another. So be mindful about how you are regulating yourself and how you are communicating and supporting one another. So we start to see there are these opportunities to provide some of that naming and claiming for young people, so that as they are better able to recognize what they are doing, they can start to put the skill level in practice, right? They can start to say, oh yes, here is how I can do this, or here is what I will need to be successful, right? So as we lead as adults, being able to make sure that we are letting young people know when they are engaging in each of these items, right? When they are using teamwork, when they are showing responsibility, when they will need initiative, etc. As we start to put that into practice, as we make that known to young people, really we're starting to put our efforts into what we call structure and interaction, right? So the strategies, the methods, the ways that we engage young people. Social emotional learning is always happening, but too often it's passive. It's secondary to whatever our end goal might be. And we want to take a step back, and we want to make sure that the structure that we're providing for young people and the ways that we are interacting with young people is going to proactively call out social emotional learning as a skill that's being developed right along some of those classroom subjects, right along some of those academic pieces, because they're doing them in tandem. And it's a great thing to be able to share and explain with young people, to know that they are not just making, a math problem solved. They are also really demonstrating initiative, being able to follow the entire equation through. They're able to show problem solving skills if they find an error and then go back and then try again. We want to call those out as explicitly as possible, so that young people can recognize that they have these skills, they have these abilities, and that they can use them anywhere that they might need them. So when we think of structure and interaction, the first thing that we set as our foundation is making sure there's that level of safety and support. We want our experiences with young people to be structured and predictable, that there is a regular flow to what our time together looks like, that they might know that we are going to come in and use that morning calm, right? That's a great example of structure and predictability. If I know that every time I start the school day, I get to come in and have a couple of minutes to get myself adjusted, right? Or if I'm a classroom teacher in history, they might know that I'm going to have my quiz question of the day that starts our time together, that we will then have our lesson, have our activity, and that at the end of our time, I might do something else that's going to help them to transition from my class to another, right? Getting ready for that passing time. We're getting ready for what that next subject is. So making sure that we have that idea of predictable. Not that everything is the same time every time. That's not what we mean. That just gets boring. But that there is a rhythm and a practice to what we do, so that our young people are better able to know what to expect and what will be expected from them. The more regular our practices are, the more reliable they come to young people. And when they're reliable to young people know that they can be relaxed, that there is consistency here, which is going to allow their brain to really work and open up that prefrontal cortex, because they're not going to be worried about any stressful situations coming up. Right? We also know that we've got to be consistent and reliable when it comes to ground rules, right? So what are our standards? What are our classroom rules? How are those set, right? How are those maintained? We want to make sure that our young people know what is appropriate and what might not be appropriate, as well as positive and negative consequences for disregarding or for abiding by our group rules or our classroom rules. Having that knowledge of what the boundaries are then going to allow our young people to start to work within them and to develop their own personal boundaries that are going to be really important as they navigate the world. Right? And we know this isn't easy, right? We know that young people are working on these skills. That means they haven't mastered them yet. That means there are going to be mistakes. That means there are going to be problems. There are going to be disruptions. Sometimes you're just having one of those days, you know, and even if you want to get into that emotional regulation, you just can't. So we know that this is going to constantly be a work in progress, but that we are playing the long game, that we are working with our young people for their long-term success and well-being. So we don't need to take those day-to-day setbacks as a sign that we're never going to get there, or that young people could never develop these skills. The other thing that I want to think about when we consider structure and interaction are intentional staff practices. So intentional and also responsive staff practices provide high quality learning experiences that support the development of those social and emotional learning skills. So what are we doing consciously? What are we doing to allow young people to practice and to learn these SEL skills alongside of any other subjects that we might be teaching? Where are we looking for ways to build in things like initiative? Where are we looking for lessons and activities that are going to be based in teamwork experiences? Or where are there opportunities to call out emotion management as a needed skill and as a practice for our young people to be successful? The more effort that we are putting in, and I know that we are, you know, everybody's always asking so much of educators, and here I am, I'm going to be one more, but we know that the more effort that we are able to put in to our young people's learning experiences, the more that they are going to be able to start to approach these, start to adopt these social emotional learning skills, which is going to put them on that road towards practice and towards mastery. But we've got to be doing it intentionally or it won't happen. That's that difference between that proactive learning and that passive learning. So one method that I have to share with you for how we do this is called the social emotional learning kernels. This comes from Harvard's ESOL lab. If you are not familiar with Harvard's social emotional learning laboratory and practices, we've got that as a link for you as a resource. It's got some really great tools and strategies available for educators working with all ages of young people. But the kernels method is really making sure that we are taking these brief guided exercises that allow for exposure and practice. And these do not have to be long. These are not going to be in depth. This is finding maybe 5 minutes to explicitly call out a social emotional learning skill that young people are working on, that we can say, this is what it looks like, and then here is how we do it. So when we have these brief opportunities, we also then use discussion and debrief to work on that thinking about thinking, right? Helping young people to name and claim, helping young people to identify what they have done and how they have done it. It's also a great opportunity to build in the experiential learning cycle, where we're not just thinking about what we have done and how we have done it. We're also thinking about how can we use this skill? How can we use this practice in the future? So the next time we're in a similar situation, what can we do that would get us the similar outcome if we are pleased? Or what could we do differently if we're looking for an outcome that we don't want to repeat, right? So when we provide these regular brief experiences, we are strengthening that work of SEL development over time, right? So think about a corn kernel. You don't plant them just like one on top of the other. They're spaced out a little bit so that we can constantly go back to them. And again, these are woven into our other regular activities. So that experience of calm in the morning is a perfect example of an SEL kernel, right? It becomes familiar, it becomes comfortable, at which point we can add to them, right? So once we are comfort, once we have that skill down, then we can expand that skill. Then we can start to learn additional skills. It's also really important that when we are providing SEL kernels, that we are responding to the needs and experiences of young people. We want to make sure that we are meeting young people where they are, and we're going to talk more about that in a moment, but meet young people where they are so that we are not making things too easy or too challenging that they cease to be engaging, right? We want our young people to be in that zone of working that skill, right? And then of course, we've always got to remind them, right? As we said, we're working with young people. They are still getting this down. There's going to be times when they need to be reminded to do their self-regulation, or they might need to be reminded what respect looks like or what empathy looks like when they are engaging with others. And that's okay, because again, we know that this is a process for our young people. We know this is an effort for them, but it's an effort that we take right alongside of them. So if this looks like something that is maybe something you were already working on and you'd like to know more about, or something that might be worth building into your classroom experiences, classroom routines, I highly encourage you to check out the Harvard ESOL Lab to look for this, as well as additional practices that are like this, that can just be simply incorporated into all subjects, all lessons, all activities, just being intentional about that effort of the social emotional learning development. The other practice of structure and interaction that actually, before I do that, let me pause here. I feel like I've been talking for a minute. Are there any questions or comments on this idea of social emotional kernels or this regular skill practice? All right, we'll go ahead and continue then. The other practice that I want to consider here is what we call high quality facilitation, right? This experience where caring, responsible, knowledgeable staff build strong, supportive relationships with youth, right? The key first half here. We know that social emotional learning is only going to take place when we have strong, supportive relationships with young people. We have to be able to be seen as an asset of young people to be able to help them to develop what those skills are. When we do that, we're able to create engaging and empowering learning experiences where our young people are developing these skills in a really powerful way. And I have 4 techniques for you as we think about what high quality facilitation may look like, right? So when we think of 4 techniques, we think of facilitating, scaffolding, modeling, and coaching. Things that we do every time that we are with young people, right? You are always doing these 4 things. The question is, are you doing them intentionally? Are you doing them consciously as a way to engage, support, and educate young people? Or are these taking a back seat to other aspects of your work, right? So the first one is facilitating, fostering and sustaining youth-led dynamics and successful collaboration. So where are those opportunities for us as adults to step back and young people to step up, right? To be able to lead conversations, to be able to take on leadership roles in the classroom, to be able to come up with their own solutions, their own conversations, rather than just being told specifically what to do. Not something that we can do 100% of the time, every time, but where are those opportunities for our young people to work with one another, right? To be the leaders there, because that's going to help them with communication skills. That's going to help them with active listening skills. That's going to help them with having empathy for their peers as they show and share experiences. We want our young people to be able to learn from one another, right? And have those shared experiences with one another. Second one is modeling, right? What are we demonstrating? What characteristics, what skills are we showing that we also want our young people to develop? So, question, when are you modeling for young people? When are you modeling for young people? Yeah, so I see already in the chat, we've got my favorite response, which is always, right? I commonly say to folks, you know, if I'm lucky, young people might listen to like 20% of what I have to say. Totally normal, right? They got other things that they can listen to. They don't want to listen to me, but they are always watching us. They see us do everything. And when you say to a young person, do as I say, not as I do, right? What do? You're setting yourself up as a hypocrite and as somebody who is maybe even not to be trusted in their eyes. Our young people, especially young people who do see us as those caring, supportive adults, modeling is incredibly important because they are seeing how we conduct ourselves and they are learning from that. So they're learning from the ways that we talk about other educators who aren't in the room. They are learning from ways that we engage with our administrative staff. They are learning from ways that we deal with problems that come up last minute or unforeseen obstacles, challenges throughout the day, right? The way that we approach those things start to become the way that they approach those things. So we want to be always conscious, always intentional about what we are modeling for young people, because those are the same skills that they will be using and the same actions that they will take to put those skills into practice, right? Our third technique is scaffolding. When we think about scaffolding, here is where I mentioned earlier about meeting young people where they are, right? When we think about scaffolding, we want to set up learning opportunities to build on a young person's current skill level and to keep experiences challenging but possible, right? Challenging but possible in a way that is going to be engaging and in a way that is going to make young people practice skills that they haven't 100% got down, but without being in a way that is so challenging, so overwhelming that the young person shuts down, stops engaging, stops showing up, or on the opposite end, that might be so boring that a young person checks out or looks for other ways to find attention. So I'm going to break scaffolding down here a little bit more. When we think about scaffolding, if we have low expectations of young people and we are providing them low support, our young people are going to be bored, right? If they're bored, they're going to look for other things. They may become destructive to themselves or to property. They're just sitting around, right? What does that look like for us? Well, you know, I'm not doing a lot of work because they're not going to want to do it. I don't need to go above and beyond because they're just going to ignore what I say, right? We have low expectations of them, but we're also not providing them opportunities to engage. If we have over supports, right? If we are doing everything for our young people, we're not giving them that opportunity to grow. We're not giving them that opportunity to try new things because we're just sticking to what is comfortable and what is safe for us, right? We're saying that I know if I give all of these boundaries, if I give all of these over supports, that we can just get through the day, that our young people aren't going to be pressed into a new skill. Neither of those really look like success, nor does this next one, right? Where we have high expectations of young people, but we don't provide them that appropriate level of support. So when we think about this, we think about, why can't you just do this? You should know this by now, right? Sound familiar that you've probably heard somebody say to a room full of young people, right? You have to do this just because I said so. When we have this high expectation to align, but we're not meeting our young people at their developmental level, at their skill level, our young people are going to check out. Things are going to be too complex or too abstract for them to be able to understand and for them to be able to engage. So when we scaffold young people, we keep things right in the middle, right in that space where there is the appropriate amount of support and also the appropriate expectation based on how well we know about young people, right? So we want them to be empowered. We want them to be challenged so that they can build those skills. We want to make sure that we are being patient with our young people and that we are planning so that we know how we might need to adjust our expectations, right? I always talk about, winging it, saying that we don't have a plan in place. That's not being flexible, that's being lazy. Once we have a plan in place, we can be flexible because we can make adaptations or we can make changes based on the day, based on the young person, based on what we know we need to get out of the lesson. That's what gives us the opportunity to really meet our young people where they are so that they are going to be able to succeed. And our last technique here is coaching, being able to support young people's learning experience by providing feedback and encouragement. And when we think about coaching, coaching is all about the process. We want to be as direct and explicit as possible so that our young people can make the connection between their actions and behaviors and the social emotional learning skills that they are developing. So an example of coaching, I might say, good job, right? If I am a young person there, I hear that as a compliment. Good, I got a good job. But it doesn't tell me what I did a good job with. Whereas if I were to say, hey, you did a really great job managing your emotion and frustration when that other student knocked over your paper. That is an explicit and direct connection to what I was doing at the time. Even better would be, what did you see them do to demonstrate that emotion management? So, hey, when that other student knocked over your paper, I saw that instead of getting angry and yelling at them, you took a couple of steps back and took a deep breath. That was a really great way of managing your emotion. The more direct and explicit that we can be, the more connection that we can make between social emotional skill and expected behaviors and outcomes, the better able our young people will be to adapt those skills and use those skills in the future. So coaching is about the process. We know that it's a long-term goal to master these social emotional learning skills and that we are supporting young people on their way for doing it. So we want to be there for the process, knowing that we're not always going to be successful, but that there's always that learning opportunity. So if a young person does get frustrated, doesn't work well as a team, isn't able to problem solve, is able to show empathy, whatever it is, right? Positive, negative, we can take a learning experience out of that. When we are in that right, cool, calm, collected state after the event, we can engage, we can reflect, and we can think about what was working here and what wasn't, using those as coaching skills, as opportunities to share with a young person what they did phenomenal and what they can continue to improve on. This is so important to come back to that idea of strong relationships, because if our young people don't think that we care about them, they are not going to care what we have to say, right? We want to make sure that we are building those healthy relationships, building those strong relationships with youth so that when we are providing them coaching, that they are going to be better able to understand and better able to use those skills. All right, so I feel like I was talking for a minute again. let me come back here and just pause and ask, what questions, comments do we have around these 4 techniques of social emotional learning supports? Facilitating, scaffolding, modeling, coaching. Any comments, any questions?
Which technique do you feel is the first technique we should start with for training?
All of them. No, I think that, so I think the most important, I think all of them, of course, right? When I think of this, the 2 that I think of first, I know you told me to pick one. I think it first has to start with our modeling. Because if we're not doing it, we can have no expectation that our young people are going to. Once we can get in that conscious modeling, that intentional effort, I think then we really move into that scaffolding zone. How do we get to the space where we are keeping things where young people are able to engage and understand without getting frustrated or without getting bored? And I think that when they're in that space, right, when they're in that space to stay engaged is where that coaching really comes to life, and where that facilitating, where that sharing of the space can really come to life. So I think they're all incredibly important, but I think it starts with our own actions and behaviors as modeling. And from there, that opens up our avenues, our pathways to be able to provide the rest of them, right? And this is not though, like on Mondays I model, on Tuesdays I scaffold, on Wednesdays I coach, right? So we are constantly mixing these in. We are constantly using all of these, but as we're doing that, again, we just want to make sure that we are doing it consciously. And yes, Chelsea, I see your note in the chat. I'm really glad that you like that connection to specific praise, right? That is so important to be able to do. It's that ability to make the connection of actions and behaviors to skills and outcomes. And the more that we can address that in a tangible way for young people to connect with, the more it becomes theirs, the more that they have ownership, right? The more that our young people have the ownership and mastery of this social emotional learning development, the more responsible that they are and that we can hold them to. So when we want to talk about classroom behaviors, if I haven't learned how to conduct myself, it's going to be pretty hard to hold me accountable for those. Whereas if I know I have these skills, if I've had the practice to use these skills before I get frustrated, I can start to be held accountable in a way that's going to be meaningful for me as a learner and also supportive to the entire classroom experience as well for the educators and for other students, right? Exactly. That's where that growth can really happen. All right. Any other questions or comments on these? Otherwise, I want to dive into them a little bit deeper. I know we're starting to run short on time, but I think it'd be great to have at least a couple of minutes for a small group activity here. All right, I don't see anything else coming up here in the chat. So let's do a small activity. I'm going to send us into breakout rooms here. Looks like we've got 16 people, so we'll do like 4 rooms of 4 or so. And I'm going to give you a link to another online site here. This one is Quizlet. And this is a copy of some ways to think about, are we providing these 4 techniques to our young people? What is it that we are doing in our classes, in our time with young people, that will demonstrate use of these 4 techniques? So I'm going to send out this link. Hopefully everybody, at least one person in every small group, will be able to open it and share it. If not, you are welcome to call me or call Elise into your small group and we can help you troubleshoot. And we are only going to take about 7 to 8 minutes for this activity. So don't feel like you have to get through all of it. I'm happy to share these with you after the training. It's just a good way to start thinking and processing about how are we really able to put some of these pieces into practice when it comes to that intentional use of high quality facilitation. All right, so we've got the Quizlet group out there. I have my breakout rooms set up. If you are finding yourself either in a situation where you can't access the link or where it seems like everybody else in your breakout room is not there, let me know or let Elise know, and we will see what support we can give you. We'll see you in about 7 minutes. So for this activity in small groups, the groups will be now having a quick look at some really specific practices that are detailed in high quality facilitation. You'll be able to see those on the available handouts for this recording. And we're just asking them to discuss, is this something that they are regularly doing with their young people? If it is, what does it look like? If it's not, can anybody else in their small group give them some practice, give them some ideas on how to make this an intentional part of their work with students? We will ask them for some summaries when they come back into this space. Hey, Sierra, did you get knocked out of your breakout room?
No, no one was speaking.
Oh,
No.
okay. I'm going to see if I can add you to another room that has a more active group. I'm sorry about that.
All right, no problem.
All right, so it looks like we've got everybody back. So I know that was not a lot of time. We'll give you a list of the whole set of statements as a follow-up resource for attending this training. But as you started to look at some of those specific strategies, some of those specific practices, did any come up that seemed to be like, yes, this is definitely something that we are doing, or any that may have been like, hey, you know what? I haven't been real intentional about this. I should put some more practice into it. Did any of these statements that you discussed stand out to you?
I would, excuse me, can
Yeah.
anyone hear me? I would say that I like Chelsea idea of Calm, the tool that they use called Calm.
Yeah.
I remember using that in my practicum, and that is a good tool, and I have seen evidence that it does work. So
I think that's a great tool to use. Thank you, Sarah.
I skipped us ahead to the one about challenging students and how much fun it is to actually use that one, because you get the opportunity to explain to the, to show the student, yes, you really can do this. And then you start asking those, guided questions that, the student will eventually figure out, oh, hey, wait a second. He wasn't kidding. I did this. Look at what I did. And then the next time they see a challenge, they know that they're going to jump in and try to do it.
Yeah, right. Really building those self-efficacy skills, really building that ability to say that I can set a goal, and even if I'm throwing obstacles and challenges, I can persevere.
Right.
I can navigate this, or I can find additional great supports who are going to help me to navigate this if I need.
Right. There's nothing that bothers me much more than the statement, quote, I'm a bad test taker, or I'm a poor test taker. That drives me up a wall. And anything I can do to try to show them, no, you just have to believe in yourself. And so drop down to the level that they're at and work on getting them to understand that, yes, they are fully capable. And once they begin to realize that they're fully capable, woo, those test scores skyrocket. Duh.
For sure. I'm glad that you young people have you there as that asset to help them make that realization. I think that's so important. Right. Anything else from our small groups as you were thinking about those statements?
So there was a card that came up about empathy. Jerome shared with us that in the small community that he's in, the helipad for Metaflight is there right next to the school. So anytime there's any trauma or medical emergency, they have to be flown out, but it's right next to the school. So every time that helicopter lands or the ambulances come through, of course, the whole school stops. And either the teachers have to guide them through allowing them, because the community is so small, everybody already knows what the situation is. More times than not, it's somebody that they know. So guiding them through it, understanding that we might not be able to get through this lesson right now. We might need to take a minute or to go ahead and guide, redirect the students back into the lesson. Okay, they're headed on to get the help that they need. Let's get back to the lesson.
Yeah, that we call that. Thank you very much for sharing. We call that pause for the cause. Sometimes there are things that are more important to be dealt with than whatever I had on my lesson plan for the moment. And I know that if I try to proceed with my lesson plan, it's only going to further exacerbate the situation that's apparent. So just taking that pause for the cause. Sometimes it might just be a few minutes. Sometimes it might be a longer time. but then being able to provide those supports for young people as a way to manage and care and connect, and then figure out what is the method to proceed is going to be hugely important. And empathy certainly plays a role in all of that.
As a
All right.
side note, I'll say this about it too. You think then, how are you going to get to all of your curriculum? How are you going to get to it? You can't get, because there's all this stuff we have to accomplish. We've got to talk about these 50,000 things. And it's like, oddly enough, I love pause for the cause. That's beautiful. You pause, then when you get back to it, it goes faster. I have not had one issue getting through my curriculum, not one. If anything, I get done early, and I just do enrichment stuff. Like all of April is usually enrichment month, just whatever I feel like doing. Because we deal with this stuff. It's amazing how much quicker it works.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that anecdote there that, like, if I'm a distracted learner, it's going to take you 2 to 3 times longer to teach me something. Whereas if I can focus, it's going to be a lot smoother for everybody. And I think that's a great example. All right. So I know we are just about out of time for our 90 minutes. So I want to make sure that we're not asking you to stay any longer than what we had planned. So let's take a second and just bring it all together. So remember, this is an introductory piece. There will be extensive, extended, continued trainings on SEL this fall, where we are really going to dive deep into these 6 domains, how we provide them to young people, what those experiences are for young people, and then how do we assess that effort, right? How do we go back, continuously improve our supports and services for youth? But for right now, our key takeaways here: we know we have to have safe and supportive environments. We know that it has to rely on our intentional responsive staff practices. We pull in that youth ability for social emotional learning development, and we're going to have that shared successful year, right? We celebrate every success with our young people, no matter how small or how large, but we want to make sure that we are giving those young people the opportunity to celebrate their hard work, even if they still have a lot longer to go to master some of these SEL skills. As we close out here, I'm happy to stay online, continue to talk, answer any questions. But again, I want to make sure we're cognizant of that 90-minute time. So we do have one final question for everybody. We're big believers in the experiential learning cycle of making sure that we take that time to process and think through what we did and how we use it. So our reflection question for the day is going to be in the chat feature here. You can answer and type. We'd love to be able to go back and look at this. But it's really thinking about what we've talked about today. Some of the staff practices, the importance of SEL, brain development. What's something here that we talked about that you could start using right away, right now? What is something that you need to put a little bit more time and effort into, maybe could use for next school year? And then what would be a longer term goal that you would like to put into practice, maybe 2 or 3 years out into the future? We'll let you respond there in the chat. You can pick 1, 2, or 3 of all of those questions that you would like to answer. I'll give folks just a minute to do that. While they're answering, Elise, any other announcements that we should make here in our time together?
I dropped this in the chat, but I'll share too. You mentioned the fall trainings. We will make sure everyone who registered for this webinar gets that information. We might also be sending out sort of a poll to help us select some of the best dates, because that institute will run more than one time. But we want to help the Wyman team select the dates that the most people can attend. So keep an eye out for that. If you haven't checked out mohealthyschools.com, I encourage you to do so and follow us on Twitter. We share a lot of opportunities for professional development, as well as resources for both educators, but also other school staff. So excited that you joined us today and look forward to staying connected.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you all for your time and participation. Again, I can stay on as long as anybody would like to. I just want to be mindful of that 90 minutes and also for what our recording is. But if anybody does have any questions, any comments, thoughts, either about that reflection question or just in general of what we discussed, I'm happy to be here. If not, have a great rest of your day and have a wonderful, healthy summer.
Thank you, Nate. I do see one question in the chat for you. Sorry, before I let you go.
So,
Other folks can log off as they need to, but we do have a question in the chat.
yeah, I see that. How do we go about implementing SEL for professional development for our school district? So one, I think this is a great opportunity to reiterate what Elise just said. We are going to have trainings. So look at what dates may be valuable to you and let Elise or the Missouri Healthy Schools team know so we can see maybe we can schedule it in that period. Two, do I have my email up here? Did I do that? I probably just put yours. I did just put yours. So I'll put my email here in the chat. Please reach out to me. Happy to share lots and lots of resources and supports that are available. So here is that reference that I mentioned where Casel has lots of great opportunities. Harvard has lots of great opportunities that you can look to see. Are these meeting your school's needs? Is this what is going to be like the right stepping in point? And then I'm also happy to talk about what else we may be able to offer, if anything, on top of any of these features. But certainly I think starting place is getting school administration on board to say that this is something that we need, not just for our students, but also for our teachers. And then to look at where can we start building in. So what does a professional development calendar look like? Do you have an hour to introduce stuff? Do you have a day to do a whole workshop? Or do you have a series of days? And then from there, being able to figure out what's that appropriate level of knowledge transfer, and then dive into for staff to start getting acquainted with this in August. But happy to talk more with that if you would like.
I appreciate it. I will look some more into this. And are you guys starting to do more face-to-face PD, or is this going to be something you would do virtual?
So I think for the trainings that Elise mentioned, I think those are virtual. Yes, I'm getting a head nod. So those are both virtual. But I know that like my organization will be reassessing this summer to figure out like, are things back in person or are we still doing virtual? I think they would both be on the table for discussion, but I can't commit to either one.
I see. Okay. And how quickly are you filling up for PD development? Is there certain individuals that represent certain parts of the state in Missouri, and that would be your contact individual? How does that work?
Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah,
I think you're the best person to answer here.
We haven't quite figured this out. So this is our first step of doing the webinar and then sending out an application to those who attend this. So this is kind of the introduction. And then if we can get schools on board, if it's a big school, then they might need one just for themselves. But if there's multiple smaller schools in an area, that we can get together to work together. But our hope is to fund at least 4 locations for some intensive SEL and pilot this with Wyman as our partners, and then see from there if we can expand it. But having like an intensive group work to really work with the schools versus having just one person from each school be able to attend and do it.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for putting this on. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
This was great. Thank you so much, guys.